All right, I think there are nearly 30 of us here tonight, so I think we can get started. This is a pedestrian audit training being put on by the Montgomery Planning Department, and my name is Eli Glazier. I'm the project manager for the county's pedestrian master plan. In addition to pedestrian planning, I also work on the county's Vision Zero efforts and help implement master plans as they come through the regulatory process. So we are joined tonight by Jim Elliott and Katie Hooser from Tool Design, who were the consultants that helped us put together this toolkit, and I'll let them introduce themselves now.
Hey everybody, I'm Jim Elliott from Tool Design. I'm the project manager for our work on this particular task. We do a lot of walk audits in our work. In fact, Katie and I are going out to do a walk audit tomorrow, pedestrian audit rather. And so we're excited to share the toolkit with you and some of the tools that are provided through it.
Hi everyone, Katie Heuser. I'm also a planner at Tool Design. Like Jim was saying, we do quite a few pedestrian audits, often for safe routes to school or other safety plans. So yeah, looking forward to sharing our work with you and helping you do your own pedestrian audit.
Great, thanks Jim and Katie. I just also wanted to say before we really get into it that this meeting is being recorded. There are a bunch of folks who had emailed me that they weren't able to attend but wanted to learn more. So this, the recording will be posted this week on the pedestrian plan website, which is montgomeryplanning.org/walking here. And I also wanted to sort of lay out probably the best way to participate in the meeting tonight. You may notice that everyone has joined muted. I think the best way to participate, if you have questions or comments about the toolkit, which is very much, it's a draft. So as we get feedback this evening and moving forward, it's something that we intend to update based on that feedback. So the best way to probably participate if you are logged in to a computer is to post questions in the chat as you have them. And then sort of later on in the presentation, if you'd like to ask a question verbally, you can press the raise hand button in Teams, or if you're calling in, that's *5. And then when a staff member sort of acknowledges you, we will unmute you and you'll have the opportunity to ask your question. If you're calling in, to unmute yourself after you've been unmuted by a staff member on the call is *6. So now that housekeeping is complete, I think it's an important question, sort of why the planning department wanted to make a toolkit like this, why we wanted to create this document for the public. And I think there are several reasons sort of shown on the screen. One is, I think people, when they're walking around their neighborhood, when they're rolling around their neighborhood, tend to sort of understand sort of viscerally and sort of in their bones that if something is comfortable or uncomfortable as a pedestrian, what this toolkit really does is try and put words and put language to those concerns and to those feelings that people have, and educate people about potential sort of fixes and improvements that can help address some of these issues. The next issue, next reason the toolkit's moving forward is really to empower communities to come together to focus on priority issues. At its heart, the Pedestrian Audit Toolkit and the pedestrian audit process is it's a community building exercise. It's a coalition building exercise. It's a way for communities to come together and sort of channel their energies in a very specific direction. And then lastly, the toolkit really exists to provide community members direction about, now that we have these issues, who are the appropriate agencies, the appropriate elected officials to connect with, so we can really make change and we can sort of make improvements to our communities when it comes to these issues. So that's really why that we're doing this. And then I think the other part of this is what is the planning department's role in improving the pedestrian environment, acting on these changes? And I think it can be a little frustrating for us sometimes, frankly, and I think for members of the community, that the planning department is essentially, we create these tools to help community members more effectively advocate. We develop design guidance, we make master plan recommendations, and then we work to ensure that this design guidance and these recommendations are followed. But at the end of the day, we do not implement these projects. We don't construct sidewalks, et cetera. So our role in this is really to help community members advocate for these projects in their own communities, to advocate for pedestrian improvements through master plans, through private development, and through public development. So the toolkit that we've created with tool design is really very much in line with how we try and affect change at the planning department by empowering community members like yourself. So I think with that, very excited to hear from Jim and Katie about the toolkit, and thanks for joining us today.
Jim, you're muted right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Eli, for that. We wanted to start it out by talking about what a pedestrian audit is in general and why you would do it. So it's an in-person effort by a group of people to assess pedestrian conditions. You know, Eli mentioned the sort of intuitive sense that you have walking down the street of what pedestrian conditions are like. This is an intentional effort to try to document issues that negatively impact pedestrian safety, comfort, and accessibility. Comfort is a safety obviously is very important. Comfort is also important. Montgomery County wants to encourage walking. Accessibility is important for all people, but particularly for people with disabilities. And as Eli mentioned, one of the main goals of a pedestrian audit is to help communities identify and build consensus around pedestrian issues. You're bringing together a group of people, and a big part of the magic of that whole process is observing things together, and then talking together about what needs to happen in your community to make pedestrian conditions better. So what does a pedestrian-friendly community look like? Pedestrian-friendly communities have a variety of characteristics, and these are just some of them. They have wide, well-maintained, and well-connected pedestrian facilities. You see that in this photo at the right, a nice sidewalk. There are frequent opportunities to cross the street. You don't have a huge long block that you have to walk down to get to the next street crossing. And there are regular crossing opportunities. If it's a busy road, that means opportunities to cross at the light where you're protected that come up relatively frequently. Connections to commercial and residential areas, you need places to go. When you're walking for recreation is an important part of people's lives, but there are also things that you can do walking for transportation, taking care of errands, going to appointments, shopping, etc. Connections to other transportation modes are important, to transit, to bicycling, etc. And then low motor vehicle speeds. Motor vehicle speeds affect the pedestrian environment significantly, affect pedestrian safety, and also comfort. Some other things that are characteristics of a pedestrian friendly community: well-maintained trees and landscaping. We saw that in the last slide. Lighting is very important, and you know, it's something that you might not see depending on the time of day that you go out, but lighting affects people's sense of personal security. It affects safety at intersections and crossings, safety along the sidewalk. So that's an important aspect of a pedestrian-friendly community. It's something that we start to notice a bit more as the days grow shorter. It's darker in the morning, gets darker earlier in the evening. So that's an important attribute. The ability to walk and roll at all times of day and night without fear of crime, harassment, or racial profiling. This is an aspect of the pedestrian environment that sometimes you don't think about when you're out conducting a pedestrian audit, but it's an important element for people. People may make decisions about whether or not they're going to travel as a pedestrian based on their sense of personal security, sense of personal safety in an area. So that's an important thing to consider as you're conducting an audit. And I wanted to stop here because I know that you all probably have your own ideas about what a pedestrian-friendly community looks like. And I'd like to ask you to put thoughts that you have about pedestrian-friendly communities, what attributes those have, into the chat, so we can see them.
We have one comment that says lack of fear of being run over by a car.
That's an important one.
Someone mentioned curb ramps being well constructed.
That is a key.
A good comment relating to trees and landscaping, mentioning shade.
Great. Definitely important. Shade is important for comfort.
Doing a lot of great ones. Someone mentioned safe and welcoming for kids to use with limited parental supervision. Someone also echoed addressing needs of families and children at all times. Pedestrian-friendly community is accessible to all users of all ages, which is something very important, something we incorporated into this toolkit. Someone mentioned protected crosswalks at every bus stop, improving access to transit. Pedestrian-friendly communities have less pollution. Good point. Some great ones here. Active building frontages, not too much noise pollution. Another comment about connections for children, accessing school. Well-marked crossings. So I mentioned, or multiple people mentioned, no right turn on red. There's a comment about brick sidewalks can be uneven and cause obstacles to those, especially with disabilities. I'll mention a couple more. Keep on coming. Someone said no utility poles on the sidewalks. That really can constrict the width of the sidewalk and make it difficult to go around. Let's see, time to cross roadways, not allowing vehicles to turn while people are crossing. We have quite a few more. This is really great, but I'll hand it back to Jim because I know we could talk many hours about what makes a great pedestrian environment.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Those are all things that contribute to the pedestrian environment and all things that you should be thinking about as you're out conducting a walk audit, or pedestrian audit rather. So I'm going to provide an overview of the toolkit. Of course, we encourage you to check out the real thing online, and Katie is going to show you how to navigate it. There's some really good information there about how to conduct audits. These are the basic steps that go into planning a pedestrian audit. Step 1, determining the type of audit you're going to do. Step 2, determine the goals of the pedestrian audit. Step 3, determine relevant stakeholders. Step 4, determine the pedestrian audit study area. Step 5, determine the route. And step 6, select the time or the day, time, and meeting venue. So I'm going to go through each of these briefly so you have a sense of what they involve. The first one is just to think about what kind of audit you're doing, and this may be obvious, but it has an impact on all of the other steps. So pedestrian audits can focus on schools, they can focus on transit stops, pedestrian crash locations, neighborhoods, commercial areas, and depending on the type of audit, you're going to think about inviting different stakeholders potentially. The walk audit or the pedestrian audit itself may focus on a different area. So it's really a crucial first step. The next step is to think about the goals for the audit. And you may have a variety of different goals instead of just one. So one of them could be to identify barriers to pedestrian travel in an area. Another one that we've already mentioned, which is really important, is building consensus among community stakeholders. Collecting evidence to support requested improvements, perhaps in a particular area, you've already identified some potential improvements. A pedestrian audit could be used to collect photos, videos, other evidence to help support a request for changes. A pedestrian audit could be used to educate members of your community about what the issues are in the community. So that's kind of part of building consensus, sharing information with them about what pedestrian needs are. And then pedestrian audit can be used to kind of consider disparities between different areas, between different neighborhoods as well. Step 3 is to determine stakeholders, and this is a really important step. Overall, you'll want to, in general, keep the walk audit to about 15 people. It can be larger than that, but it becomes difficult to walk or travel with a group that is much larger than 15, and at that point you typically have to split into 2 groups so people can hear and contribute. These are some of the stakeholders that you might want to consider including, and as I mentioned, the stakeholders that you're going to invite will depend on the type of walk audit you're doing. So for example, if you're conducting a walk audit at a school, you'll want to think about specific stakeholders that might be important for a school. People who should be invited because they have a role in making decisions at the school or around the school, such as the principal, and other members of the school community. And there are similar considerations for other types of walk audits. And in the toolkit, there's not only this general list of stakeholders to consider including, but also lists for each particular type of walk audit that you might want to conduct. So the next step, step 4, is to think about the study area. In general, you don't want the study area to be too large. You got to keep in mind that when you're traveling with a group, and talking about the pedestrian environment as you go along, that it can take a lot longer than if you were just out there walking on your own. So, depending on the type again, you might choose a single block or a few blocks along a corridor to conduct your pedestrian audit on. It might be a quarter mile or a half-mile radius around a destination. Quarter mile, is a common sort of rule of thumb. Quarter mile walking distance is a rule of thumb for a variety of different types of destinations, schools, transit stops, etc. It might be a small area with some known pedestrian issues or a route between two destinations. For example, you might want to take a look at the route between a school and a park because kids travel from the school to the park after school. So again, it's important to keep the study area manageable so you don't bite off more than you can chew with a big group, with a group. The next step is to think about the route, the particular route that you're going to take through the study area. You'll want to start and end in the same place typically. That may not always be the case, but because people may bike, may drive to get to the pedestrian audit, you generally want to end in the same place. The route, like the study area, should be relatively short, a mile or less. We typically plan for about to cover about a half mile in 30 minutes. It might take longer than that. It might take shorter than that, depending on the nature of the group. But you want to keep in mind how long it's going to take with a group to travel the route. And then an important step in planning is to preview the route and think about where you're going to stop with the other participants and talk. You'll want to stop at some of the key issue points. You'll also want to think about how much space there is at that location for the group. You don't want to be blocking other pedestrians from traveling down the sidewalk. You want to pick a place where the full group can stand out of the way and ideally you can hear each other when they're talking.
Hey, Jim. There are several questions coming into the chat, and I think one of them by Francie Gilman I will tackle right now, and I think the other by Andy Wexler I think would be great to talk about at the end. So Francie had asked in step 3, if people want to convene a pedestrian audit in Montgomery County, how do they find the stakeholders? For example, people with disabilities. How will the planning department put out the word that stakeholders are invited to make sure that that stakeholders are involved? And I think it's a great point that the toolkit itself right now essentially says get these stakeholders if they're in your area, but we have not, I guess, added resources to identify specific stakeholders like members of the community who have disabilities. I think it's a good idea for specific communities like that, where the Commission on People with Disabilities is a county group that exists. I think that providing direction to people who are interested in conducting walk audits, that they should reach out to this group, and if anyone lives or works in the area where this audit is being conducted, that is a member of that group, for instance, they should participate. I think that's a really good point. And then Annie Tolkien has commented as well that neighborhood listservs and Nextdoor could also be good places to recruit people to join the audit. I think it is important that these audits that take place, they are very sort of community centric. They're very local things. So it may not make sense in all cases for folks who don't necessarily live in your community or work in your community to participate just because they have a certain perspective. But I think sort of recruiting and trying to be very conscious that different types of pedestrians have different pedestrian experiences is very important, and trying to be as representative as you can in understanding those diverse experiences, I think is really key. So I think it's a great question, and I think we will work to make it easier to make those connections as part of the toolkit. So thank you, Francie.
Yeah, thank you. That actually reminds me, brought up a good point that I was going to mention that Eli just covered, the importance of including diverse perspectives in the group. And I think particularly people with disabilities, you're unlikely or may overlook accessibility challenges if you don't do that during your walk audit. So that's very important. So step 6 is thinking about when this all is going to happen, and also where it's going to happen, where the meeting location is going to be. When we conduct pedestrian audits, they typically take an hour and a half to 2 hours. It really depends on how far you're walking. As I mentioned, typically half mile takes maybe a half an hour to cover with a pedestrian audit group. It sort of depends on the detail in which you're going to be reviewing it. So that's something to think about as you're planning. You also need to think about considerations related to the day and time. So, the type of weather that you can expect. I mean, this is the time to do pedestrian audits um, because the weather is generally beautiful. February can be more challenging. So that's a consideration. Can affect the amount of light that's available during the audit. Yeah, you need to think about the availability of potential participants. You might want to do some kind of poll to see when people are available. You need to think about when the meeting venue is available. Now, the meeting venue is having a meeting venue can be really helpful because typically what you want to do with a pedestrian audit before you go out is you want to meet with the group, go over a few things with them, and I'll talk a little bit more about what you would go over in a second. Go out, make your observations, come back and debrief about what's happened. And that's typically best done in a place that is quiet, out of the way, where people can talk kind of uninterrupted. So, so thinking about when a place like that might be available is an important part of the equation. And one thing to be aware of is that you can reserve a meeting venue for pre and post meetings through Active Montgomery or Montgomery County Recreation. So use those resources. I think we have links to those websites in the toolkit. And then finally, another consideration is the time of day that you want to observe. That can really affect the dynamic. Think about traffic dynamics during rush hour versus off-peak. If you're wanting to observe how things happen at rush hour, you need to plan your pedestrian audit for that period, or otherwise you won't really be able to observe the behaviors, the conditions that you're trying to observe. School dismissal is another example where it happens at a particular time of day, so you need to think about that in relation to your planned day and time. The next step is to invite stakeholders, and there are a few things that are really important to communicate to them when you invite them. One is just the purpose of the walk, the pedestrian audit. Another is where you're going to meet up to start the pedestrian audit, the day and time, of course. And then this is pretty important to talk about, wearing appropriate gear. I know that I often, when I do pedestrian audits, I fail to bring my hat or sunscreen, sunglasses. Some people arrive at a pedestrian audit without good walking shoes. So it's important to talk about those types of things when you're reaching out to people so that they come prepared to conduct the pedestrian audit. And we provide a template in the stakeholder, or not the stakeholder, but the pedestrian toolkit to help you with that, to get you started on your invitation to pedestrian audit participants. Step 8 is to prepare for the walk audit. I mean, all of this is preparation in some ways, but you need to think about the actual event itself and what's going to happen during that event. And typically one thing that you want to do is to think about what you're going to say in the meeting before the pedestrian audit, and sort of jot down some notes on that. You might want to do some research into pedestrian issues in the study area so that you'll be able so you'll know what to look for, what the key issues already are. One way to do that, one type of research you could do is to look at crashes in the study area, and there's an interactive crash map that you can go to for that. That is published by Montgomery County, and Katie is going to give a demonstration of how that works later on. And then finally, sort of the last step, this is almost day of, is to gather the materials that you're going to need. And it's, on the right are some examples of materials that you might want to take with you. One is a data collection form, and a data collection form is provided in the toolkit online. A clipboard can be helpful to write on, pens, name tags, reflective vests. Those are really helpful if you have them to as a safety measure. Kind of distinguishes the group as well. And then finally, camera and smartphone. So these are sort of the key steps in conducting the audit. I've already mentioned some of these. There's a pre-audit meeting. We typically we recommend that you do a safety talk to remind people to be safe when they're out conducting the audit. Going out and doing the audit itself and recording your observations, and then the debrief that comes after that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the pre-audit meeting. So this is where the participants in the pedestrian audits will introduce themselves, where you'll discuss the study area and the route for the audit to make sure everybody's aware of that. You might want to provide a map of the route, especially if you're going to be splitting up into different groups. You'll want to talk about some of the known safety conditions, sort of from your own research, and also relying on the group's collective knowledge of what those are, because it can be helpful to know that before you go out, so you can intentionally try to observe them. You'll want to talk about what participants should be looking for during the pedestrian audit, and there's a reference provided in the toolkit that discusses pedestrian safety issues that you should be looking for. And as a number of them we've already discussed. And then you'll want to discuss how to use the data collection form. Just give people some basic instructions on that before you go out. And if you have a relatively large group, you might want to consider assigning specific roles to people in the group. You might want to have somebody focusing on taking photos and videos. Photos and videos can be tremendously compelling, can help explain what existing conditions are to others. You could have people focusing on different aspects of the audit as you go along. So that's something to think about as well. I mentioned the safety training. That is very important to do before you go out. There's a tendency when you're out in a big group to kind of forget about about safety. You're talking with others, you're observing other things. In a way, you're distracted. So that's why this safety training is so important. And what you want to do is you want to, communicate some of the things that are on this slide. You want to, communicate that participants in the pedestrian training should not take risks, that they're responsible for their own safety and should be looking out for each other as well when they're out there, that they should be using common sense, that they should follow traffic laws, waiting for the pedestrian signal before crossing, for example. That's all important to do. Being aware of sight lines and obstructions. Don't step out between cars without looking where somebody might not be able to see you, a driver coming along. Cell phones and headphones and other distractions, trying to avoid those. And finally, not blocking the sidewalk when you're in a big group. That's something that's that is something that happens sometimes, but you should try to avoid that because there are other people who need to get about their daily lives, and you don't want to block the sidewalk and prevent them from doing that. So the next step is to actually go out, and so you'll be out observing conditions with your group, and you'll have reviewed the key pedestrian safety issues section in the toolkit, so you'll understand what to look for. You'll also have a briefing from the group leader to help you with that. You'll want to record your observations as you're going along. We have the data collection form to help you with that. And I mentioned already the value of using photos and videos and to record pedestrian conditions. So what are some of the key pedestrian safety issues? Here are a few related to sidewalks. Some of these are pretty obvious. Missing sidewalks should be noted. Sidewalks that are too narrow. Think about somebody with a wheelchair, using a wheelchair, somebody with a stroller. Can they get through? If they can't, that's something to note as you go along. Driveways and alleys, if there are a lot of them along the pedestrian pathway, that can create challenges. They may be sloped and difficult to get across if you're in a wheelchair. They also create conflict points that raise safety concerns. So if there are a lot of driveways and alleys, that's something to note as well. Sidewalk slope can affect a person's ability to use a wheelchair on a sidewalk. It's very hard to control a wheelchair if there's a significant, or even what a person who doesn't use a wheelchair might consider a relatively slight slope can be really challenging to navigate in a wheelchair. Sidewalk maintenance, cracked sidewalks, like you see in the left-hand photo, vertical changes in level that might be difficult for a person in a wheelchair to get over or cause a tripping hazard. You should be noting these things as you go along. Physical barriers in the middle of the sidewalk, a telephone pole like the one that you see in the right-hand photo, those are important to note as well. And whether or not there's a buffer to the sidewalk. The buffer is a very important piece of pedestrian infrastructure. It separates pedestrians from moving traffic. It's also a place to put snow. It has a number of other benefits. So in general, you want to have a buffer between the sidewalk and the street. So here are a few of the key pedestrian safety issues you should be thinking about at crossings. Are there marked crosswalks? Marked crosswalks let drivers know to expect pedestrians crossing. I mean, there are crosswalks at every intersection, but not all of them are marked, and the markings are an important indicator. Markings also help people with low vision or people who have vision disabilities of various types navigate across the crosswalk, so they're important for that reason as well. You want to think about whether there is traffic control, and by that I mean whether there's a stop sign or a traffic signal of some kind. Traffic control contributes to safer crossings to pedestrian comfort. So that's something that you'll want to note as well. Pedestrian signals tell pedestrians when it's time for them to cross the street, how much time they have remaining to cross. These are really helpful for pedestrians, and you should be noting them as well. And whether or not they include accessibility features, whether they're accessible pedestrian signals. Accessible pedestrian signals have a locator tone. When you push them, they tell you what street you're crossing. They give off a ticking noise when it's time for you to cross. These are important for people with vision disabilities. Crossing distances can affect pedestrian safety and comfort. Longer crossings, shorter crossings are better than longer crossings overall. So where there's a particularly long crossing, it's important to note that. Curb ramps, very important piece of pedestrian infrastructure for everyone really, particularly for people with mobility disabilities, but also for people using strollers and other and assistive devices of various kinds. So where those are missing, note that. Visual barriers that prevent you from seeing oncoming traffic at a crossing are important to note. It might be cars that are parked too close to the intersection. It might be vegetation that is sticking out in a way that prevents drivers and pedestrians from seeing each other. Crossing frequency, I mentioned that at the beginning, that ideally there are frequent crossing opportunities at big intersections. You don't want to, pedestrians generally don't want to wait a really long time, and when they do, sometimes they cross when they shouldn't. So that's something to think about, and whether or not there are opportunities along a road, frequent opportunities along a road. A person doesn't have to walk a half mile, quarter mile to get to a safe crossing location. Driver speeds, very important to think about and note. Even minor differences in motor vehicle speed can have a pretty significant impact on pedestrian safety. So that at about 20 miles per hour, the chance of a pedestrian dying in a collision with a motor vehicle is maybe 10% or so, 12%. It's relatively low. But by the time the speed increases to 30 miles per hour, it's doubled or trebled. So that makes a big difference. And then finally, risky driving behaviors. I mentioned earlier that personal security and comfort are also a very important part of the pedestrian environment, and you should be focusing on those when you go out to do your pedestrian audit. Things like whether there's adequate wayfinding signage, whether there are shade trees along the sidewalk, and benches to sit, and lighting. Lighting is a very important attribute of the pedestrian environment. It's easy, where lighting isn't present, it may be difficult for some people to follow the sidewalk. They may run into tree branches. They may feel unsafe. Dogs, litter, and then just in general, personal security. Thinking about that is I think very important when you're conducting a pedestrian audit. Pedestrian safety issues near transit. Key pedestrian safety issues near transit. Is there a bus stop? If there is a bus stop, is there a shelter present, and what kind of condition is it in? Can you reach the shelter from the sidewalk? And are there nearby crossings that are protected and safe for a person to cross at? Sometimes bus stops are located at mid-block locations, and that can be a safety issue for pedestrians because they're tempted to cross mid-block where there isn't a crossing rather than at a signalized or controlled location. And then, as I mentioned, after the audit, you'll want to bring everybody together again at the meeting location and discuss with everyone what they saw. This is an important part of building consensus. You'll want to talk about what you observed when you were out there and what you think ought to be done about it. What are the key pedestrian safety issues? What are the key pedestrian accessibility issues? And what issues discourage pedestrian travel? Those are things to talk about. You also want to talk about, what are the priority issues for your group? What do you think should be focused on when you communicate with the county or others about those issues? And you'll want to identify next steps and who is responsible for what. Then after the audit, it's time to think about, what communicating with others. You'll want to summarize your findings. You want to reach out and share them with other people in your community to build support for changes. And you'll want to think about reaching out to Montgomery County agencies and elected officials potentially about the issues that you've observed. And there's a great county decision tree that I'm going to show you later that can help you determine who the best person is to contact on a particular issue. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk about what the toolkit includes.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm going to go through what the toolkit includes, and then I will introduce how to navigate the toolkit on Montgomery Planning's website. So the first item it includes is a step-by-step guidance, which Jim largely went through, but we have it all written out for you, and you can potentially print that out if you'd like as well. We also have resources for inviting stakeholders, as well as including lists of stakeholders by the walk audit type, whether it be local residents, local people with disabilities, school representatives, etc. We also have an invitation template, which you can fill out details of your pedestrian audit and invite folks to participate. We have an agenda for the pre-audit meeting, including some of the things that Jim discussed beforehand. We include question prompts, which help you think about your environment as you're walking through it during the audit. There's a data collection form, which you can see on the right-hand side of this slide. I'll also introduce this later on in our training today. We also wanted to provide a couple of high-level solutions or countermeasures that may be installed according to some of the issues that you observe, whether it be to paint crosswalks so that they're easier to see, changing the timing of signals so that you have a longer time to cross, and many other solutions that the county can address to make walking easier and safer for everyone. The toolkit also includes a report template, which is just a brief document where you can type up who was involved in the audit, what you found, and next steps. And then we also have a decision tree, as Jim mentioned, which will help you find who is the best person to contact to address some of the issues that you observed. Next slide. Excellent. Now we'll get into the demonstration part of our training. There's a couple of things that we wanted to demonstrate for you, some of the elements of the toolkit, I think, which will be helpful for you to understand really how to use the different elements for the benefit of your pedestrian audit. Next slide. I'll first go through navigating the toolkit. I'll also introduce the interactive crash map that Montgomery Planning provides, which will help you learn a bit more about the context of crashes in the area that you're auditing. We'll go through the data collection form. Then we'll also introduce the creation of a Google My Map. A Google My Map is a way to easily map issues that you observe during your walk audit and can be distributed to the county and other people who are interested in what you observed. And then finally, we'll introduce this county contacts decision tree, which will help you understand who is the best audience for your particular concern. Jim, if now if I could share my screen, we'll switch that over.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Okay. All right, can you see that? Okay, so this is the Montgomery planning website. Jim, can you confirm this is the right screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so this is the Montgomery planning website. I'll first show you how to locate the pedestrian toolkit. So all you need to do is scroll down and find the pedestrian master plan. You can also find this by Googling, and then you can scroll down on the pedestrian master plan website to this first box, which is the toolkit. Excellent. So this is the web page which contains all of the toolkits and all of the accompanying resources that we've provided to make it easier for you. As you can see on the left here, there's a table of contents as well as files you can download. I'll first show you how you can navigate the table of contents. So if you want to go step by step through the guidance, you can click on the first item, which is the introduction. And this includes things we went through, such as what is a pedestrian audit, what is the purpose of an audit, etc. And if you want to go to the next page, you can use the next arrow at the bottom. Say you like to skip around, you can go to the table of contents button at the bottom of the screen and click any of the other steps that you're interested in. You can also go back to the cover page to go back to this, the main part of the site. I also wanted to highlight the different files that you can download as part of the toolkit. And if you'd rather download a whole PDF of the toolkit rather than navigating on this website and these arrows, you can go ahead and download the PDF. As I mentioned, we also have a list of stakeholders by the pedestrian audit type. So different folks to keep in mind and to invite as you plan your walk audit. And we also have an invitation template to fill out the details and send out to folks that you're looking to invite. We have a sample meeting agenda, which are just different points that you should discuss before you go on the pedestrian audit. And then we also have the report template, which you can fill out and deliver to the relevant party. So that is the toolkit. As I said before, it's on the Montgomery Planning website. You can Google it and also access it through the Pedestrian Master Plan page.
Katie, I would just add that the Pedestrian Master Plan page is available at montgomeryplanning.org/walking here. And the toolkit itself should be fairly prominent on that website. I think there's a comment in the chat that there is, if you Google the toolkit, this document itself doesn't show up immediately. I think we are working on that, and we will sort of improve the search engine optimization of this toolkit as we work to finalize it based on some of your comments. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Eli, and all the commenters. I'm going to go into the county's interactive crash map first as our first demonstration. This is a really excellent tool that the county has, which has crashes from 2015 to 2019. It's an interactive data set. You can download crash data from here and more get to know about if there's been any crashes near your area of interest. I wanted to note that while this tool does not provide information on near misses is something that you can kind of learn about from the folks that you invite on your pedestrian audit. I also want to highlight on this page, there's a really great tutorial video, but I'll just go through it all the same and you can get to know how to use this tool. So on the right-hand side here, there's quite a few graphs kind of relating to the severity of the crash or the mode, and these update as you scroll or as you pan through the map, as you can see there. You can also use this window on the left to isolate certain crashes. So for our purposes, I'm going to scroll down here and isolate pedestrian crashes. And as you can see, all pedestrian crashes are symbolized as dots. The purple dots are serious crashes and the red dots are severe crashes. You can click on each of the points to see more information about the crash. For example, this one occurred on Cameron Street and 2nd Avenue, involved with a pedestrian during daylight. There's lots of other important information here and helps to understand maybe some of the issues that might be present in this area. You can also download this information if you'd like to dive deeper into it. I'm going to use this window on the bottom left to select certain crashes to download. So I'm going to select collisions involving pedestrians. It's going to prompt me to choose a shape that I want to draw on the map to download that data. So say if I want to look at Benton Street here in Silver Spring, I guess I'll select this polygon and then I'll start drawing points to encompass the location that I want to learn more about. And as it says here, I'm going to double click to complete. Then it'll prompt me to click apply. And as you can see, it's highlighted the crashes that occurred on Benton Street in this area. And they're all highlighted there. I'll click these 3 circles to open up the attribute table, which is just a table that summarizes each crash that occurred in this area. So as you can see, it has information about the number of lanes, if there's an off-road crash, the weather, the lighting, etc. And if you want to download this information, there's this options button to the left here. I'm going to click the down caret and then export to a CSV. And that way you'll have a nice clean spreadsheet about this information if you'd rather have it offline. So that's the interactive crash map. Like I said before, there's another tutorial video on the website if you want to learn more about how to use this, but it really provides some context about what some of the issues may be in the place that you're auditing. All right, I'll go to our next demonstration of today and look into the data collection form. So to download the data collection form, I'm going to go back to the Pedestrian Audit Toolkit page. Then under this download files, the last item is the data collection form. So I'll download that and then it opens up in PowerPoint. Bring this over here. Excellent. So this is the data collection form. As you can see, the first page includes instructions and includes instructions of how to set it up before the pedestrian audit. Really highlighting here that a map must be inserted before you print out the page, and then instructions of how to use it during the pedestrian audit. So locating the page of the relevant topic. So we have pages for sidewalks, intersections, pedestrian or personal security, driver behavior, and connection to transit. And then we encourage everyone to mark the issue on a map, whether it be with a line, with a star, with a circle, and then to take notes on the right-hand side of each page. And the more information you record, the better, just because sometimes it may be difficult to remember what you observed after the fact. So we encourage everyone to be detailed and just so you remember what you saw. So this is a sample of what a completed data collection form would look like. As you can see, this is the sidewalks page, and I've inserted my map already. And I've noted, I've drawn a line here, and I've noted that the sidewalk is very narrow. And then here I've noted that there's a crack in the sidewalk. So I drew a star there and wrote a note to the right. So that's what it would look like if your data collection form was complete. This third page is just a general record of information of the walk audit, just to keep you organized. And then the fourth page is a list of guiding questions to keep in mind as you're walking. For example, for sidewalks, is there a sidewalk present? Is it wide enough? For driver behavior, are drivers obeying traffic laws? Is there fast traffic? Are drivers yielding at crosswalks? There's also a note down the bottom here, which I think is very important, is to remember to think about all types of road users, whether it be children, people with disabilities, people who use mobility assistive devices like wheelchairs, walkers, or even strollers. Just to keep in mind all types of pedestrians and making sure that everyone is comfortable walking and rolling in your study area. Excellent. So this is what the data collection form looks like before you set it up. And I'll show everyone how to insert a map. I'm going to go back to my internet here and go to Google Maps. I'm already here in downtown Silver Spring, and I'm going to take a screenshot of our study area. So let's say we're looking at Fenton Street. I will open up my snipping tool and create a new screenshot. Well, oh wait. Actually, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to transition to the aerial of our study area just so we can better see what this looks like from an aerial perspective. So open up my snipping tool and I'll just save a new screenshot of the area. All right, now that I've saved my screenshot, I'm going to upload it to my data collection form. Like I said, like this says here, click the icon to add a photo from your file. So I'll add the screenshot that I just took. And you should be able to see it right in there, easy. Great, and now I want to just do a quick demonstration of how you might mark up the data collection form as if we were in the field. So if you observe an issue from the sidewalks page, and if we observe a narrow sidewalk, you can draw a line. So I'll add a line here. Let's say between Bonifant and Easley, maybe there's a really narrow sidewalk. I'll make that larger so it's easier to see. And then I would insert a comment about that, maybe saying the sidewalk is narrow because of light poles and fencing. Maybe I also observe on this line that I drew that the driveways to the gas station create some points of conflict. So I'll say driveways present points of conflict between pedestrians and vehicles.
I'm gonna jump in and just clarify one thing, which is that the intention is that you'll print out these data collection forms and fill them out with markers. So Katie is doing this in PowerPoint because we're not in person. But what you would do is set these up, print them out, and then go out and do your observations.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, unfortunately, we could not demonstrate this in person, so we'll do the best we can virtually. I'll just do one more demonstration, how to record on issue on a sidewalk or intersection or a crosswalk. So I'll go ahead and upload my screenshot again. And maybe I've noticed at the intersection of Wayne Avenue and Fenton Street that the crosswalks are skewed and long. It's just very hard. It takes a long time to cross. Maybe I'll go ahead and add a star here. And then I'll write down that the crosswalk is long and takes a long time to cross. Yeah, so that's basically the data collection form. There are other topics that you should also be keeping in mind, including driver behavior, personal security, and connection to transit. But we thought we would divide each of those topics onto different pages so that you can keep the different topics kind of separate and make sure that you have enough room for all of the observations that you make. If there's something else you want to add, Jim, about the data collection form, I'll hand it back to you for our next demonstration.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So I'm gonna now share my screen again. And Katie, I think you might have to, okay, there we go. And okay, whoops. Can everybody see my screen? So I'm going to show you kind of how to record your observations in a Google My Map. So one thing you could do is you could go out and you could collect observations using the data collection form that Katie just showed you. And then when it comes to sharing that information with others, it can be helpful to provide it in an interactive map like you find in Google Maps. People can zoom in and zoom out. You can add photographs, etc., and that can help you get across what the issues are. So I'm going to explain how to do that. So the first thing that you would do is you would go to Google Maps, and that's www.google.com/maps. And that takes you to Google Maps. And then you need to make sure that you're logged in into your Google account. Google requires that you have a Google account in order to create your own map. So that's an important step to take. And then the next step is from the Google Maps page, there's this menu, and it looks like 3 lines. You click on that. You click on your places, and you can see that one option is maps. And this option will show all of the maps that you've already created, and provide a button that allows you to create a new map. So I'm going to click that button. It will create a new map that I can share with other people. The first thing that you might want to do is give your map a title. So I'm going to call this Fenton Street Walk Audit. And I'm going to save that. The next thing is to zoom in on the area where you conducted the pedestrian audit. So I'm going to zoom in on Fenton Street and Easley Street here. There we are. So there's a lot of stuff on this map when you zoom in, and you might want to think about changing the base map, because there are a variety of different options, and some of them don't show as much, of the points of interest around the location, which add to kind of the visual clutter of the map. And to do that, you go down here where it says base map, and there are a variety of different types of base map. There's a satellite view, for example, that doesn't get rid of a lot of the visual clutter, but there's also a simple atlas view that does. So this is just showing the streets, bus stops, and a few other things. So it's a lot easier to read. And then to add a line, let's say you made an observation about the sidewalk on Easley Street, that there are some pinch points along, or sidewalk on Fenton Street that between Easley and Bonifant, that there are some pinch points there, and wide driveways. So what you would do is you would click this little icon, and you would select add line or shape. And then to put down the first point of the line, you click on the map, and then each time you click, adds another segment to the line. And to complete a line, you double click. And once you double click, you get this pop-up that allows you to put in a title for your line, and it works the same way for points. So I'm going to call this and I'm just naming the segment because it appears in the menu over here, so that it's a little bit easier to navigate between different comments if you do that. Okay, and then in this field, I'm going to put what the issue is. And I can even include a photograph of what I observed, which is one of the real advantages of using a Google map, a photograph or a video. And to do that, you click this little camera icon, and you navigate to where your photos are. I've stored mine on Google Drive. I'm sorry about my dog barking. And then I can select the photo that I want to use, and then that photo pops into the point. So if I save this, and I click on the line, whoops, let me just close out of this. I click on the line, the photo will show inside. And I can also adjust the width of the line and the color of the line. And I think I'm going to do that because I want it to show up on the map so people can easily find it. And I want it to work if people are showing the aerial base. So if I flip over to the aerial base here, you can still see that on the map. And again, if I click here, I can see the photo, and if I scroll down, I can see the comment. And people, if they want to, they can zoom in, they can look at this in Street View. Street View is not available in this particular view, but you can access it separately. So this is really helpful. I'm going to do one more to give you an idea of how this works. And this time I'm going to do a point. So to put in a point, you would click on the point icon on the menu here, and you would put the point where you wanted it. And for this one, I'm going to label it, whoops, and I just did something that I often do, which is I deleted it before I was able to put in the title. So I'm going to call this point B. And Bonifant. I'm going to say, let's say an accessible pedestrian signal. Beach. So I can type that in, and then I can select a photo of it. Again, going to the photos on my drive. There's a photo, and it pops into the Google map. And again, I can adjust the color of the point if I want to. I can even use different icons Google provides. So the value of this is that you can incorporate photos and videos. People can zoom in and zoom out and sort of follow along with your observations. To actually share this map, what you would do is you would click, let me go back, you would click where it says share, and then you need to click this little button here to enable you to share with other people. So that makes it possible to share, and at that point, you can copy it using this particular icon, and you can send the link to other people. You can put it on a website. So this is a great way to share your observations with other people. Okay, again, I apologize for my dog. Before I move on, are there any questions about Google Maps?
I wanted to know that we have instructions written in the toolkit itself, if you want to refer back to those as well.
Yes, there are instructions in the toolkit itself, basic instructions for how to set up a Google My Map. All right, so I think the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something that I really like and I think will be helpful to you. And it is a page on the Montgomery County, the Montgomery Planning website. It's also linked to from the toolkit that helps you identify the appropriate person or address to contact in Montgomery County for different types of issues. So, for example, if you want to request sidewalk repair, you would click on the button next to request a sidewalk repair, and then it tells you exactly how to go about requesting the sidewalk repair. If you want to report a missing curb ramp, similar. So in some cases, see, like this, there are different levels, two different levels. So in this case, if you're interested, or if the issue is that a traffic or street sign is missing or damaged, then you also need to know whether or not it's a local or county road or a state road, because that will impact who you contact. So if it's a local or county road, you click on that and it tells you how to report it. If it's a state road, gives you a different contact. So I think this could be really helpful in really determining who the appropriate or what the appropriate contact is for any given issue. And that completes our demonstrations. So I'm going to I think at this point, we are going to take questions, I believe. Let's see. Here we go. Oops. Okay, there we go. So we're at the questions slide. Does anybody have questions about what we've presented so far? Montgomery Planning's goals for the toolkits, anything related to this? Have any questions come up in chat that would be worth talking about now?
Yeah, this is Eli again. I just wanted, I guess, before we get into those questions, I think to reiterate that this toolkit is, and the pedestrian audit process is really a mechanism for community members to do self-guided events and analysis and sort of prioritization of some of these issues before creating a report or some other type of deliverable, and and communicating that information to the relevant agencies and elected officials. This is not necessarily a process that the county will undertake with you necessarily. I think there may be opportunities for collaboration or opportunities over the course of sort of in the coming months and years, obviously, for members of county agencies like MCDOT or the State Highway Administration or the Planning Department to participate in these audits that you develop and you organize. But I think the main purpose of this document and of the pedestrian audit process really is for community members to essentially use their expert knowledge that they gain through these experiences to effectively advocate and communicate the needs of their specific community to elected officials and to agencies. So I think that's a key part of this. I also want to say again that this training is being recorded. So if you missed something or you want to send this to somebody, this will be up on our website later this week, and we will sort of publicize that to you all. We have all of your contact information, your email through your RSVP. And then also, in addition to the great elements that Jim and Katie highlighted here, there is a whole section of the toolkit about potential, what we would call countermeasures, which are treatments that can be installed to address some of the issues identified. For instance, if there's a speeding issue or if there's an issue with it may be unsafe to cross the street or something like that, you can look at sort of the priority issues you've identified in your toolkit, in your audit, and you can then identify potential countermeasures, potential treatments that would help sort of mitigate, minimize, eliminate some of those issues that you identified. So there's a whole part of this document that goes into what those treatments may be, and then there's a lot more information largely from our Vision Zero Community Toolkit, which is a separate document about some of those treatments as well. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then there's one question that I had mentioned in the comments that I said we would get back to, and that was from Andy Wexler about essentially overcoming resistance to traffic calming from county agencies, particularly DOT traffic engineering and fire and rescue. And traffic calming, for those who may not know, can be anything from speed humps to narrowing roads through road diets or lane diets or chicanes or closing some roads or some portions of roads to through traffic entirely as a way to minimize both vehicle speeds and throughput. So I think Andy, in the past, there may have been more resistance to some of these things than there are today. In the past couple years, the planning department has worked really closely with the fire and rescue folks on something I'm posting in the chat, which is called the Fire Department Access Performance-Based Design Guide, which is really a good way, probably the best way for treatments like speed humps and different things to work really well with fire and rescue to sort of identify what parts of what fire and rescue needs are hard and fast standards and must be sort of rigidly complied with, and what other parts have some flexibility. So that's a document that we worked out to sort of smooth over some issues we may have had in the past about implementing some of these things. And then the other thing I'll say on the DOT traffic engineering side is DOT internally is really actively looking into updating their internal guidance on where and when traffic calming is appropriate. And Dave Helms just posted in the chat the next document I was going to mention, which is the Montgomery County Complete Streets Design Guide, which is a document that the planning department worked really closely with Montgomery County Department of Transportation to identify for all of the different types of streets in the county, not only what the default and preferred, et cetera, sidewalk widths are and speed limits and things like that, but also which roads traffic calming approaches are welcome and which ones it may not be so appropriate for, and then other things that are really relevant to the pedestrian audit toolkit, like how often there should be protected crossings. So like how often should there be a signalized intersection or a stop controlled intersection or with some other sort of traffic control to make it safer for pedestrians and other road users to cross the street. So I just wanted to highlight those two examples of our really close collaboration with the two agencies that you mentioned. And I really do believe, honestly, that we're making a lot of progress in this department when it comes to collaborating with those groups. So thanks, Andy, for that question from earlier on. Other questions in the chat? From Carolyn, will the links shared in this chat be posted on the website and shared in a follow-up email? Yes, I can share, in addition to sharing a link to the recording itself, I can attach a link to the chat document, and in the body of the email, I can sort of annotate any links that have been shared in the chat itself if you don't want to sort of dive into the chat document. So good question, Carolyn. Any other questions for us? If not, Jim had very briefly posted my email address in the PowerPoint, but my email, and I can post it in the chat as well, is eli.glazier@montgomeryplanning.org. And as you use this toolkit, if you have questions about this toolkit, if you have any other questions about any other pedestrian issues in Montgomery County, I'm the person you should be reaching out to. And I'm happy if I don't know the answer or I'm actually not the appropriate person to connect you with somebody who is. So I really appreciate the time you all have spent with us this evening discussing, I think, this really exciting tool. And I hope you all use it. And I look forward to seeing the reports that you create after using this toolkit. So thank you all very much. And have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.